Well, hey, good afternoon, Brett, Kay, Pat, and Wayne. Nate Amack here with Insurance Producers Network. Hope this finds you well and that you had a great weekend. Hey, I am sending over this package summary proposal here for your review. Obviously, we're dealing with an effective date here, December 1st, and I just have typed this cover sheet up here, and then I've included the proposal on the backside of this thing for your review. Looks like we have a time scheduled for Thursday this coming week. And so I wanted to get this over to you for your review so that you can have any questions or updates that you would like to have on there. Here's a list of the carriers that we marketed, that we touched base with, emailed with, and we tried to do it two different ways. We tried to do what we call a business owner's package or business owner's policy, in which the property, the liability, the business owner's personal property, liability, D&O, directors and officers, that type of thing, is all bundled into one package. Understand that we would still have to supplement because of some of the higher limitations that are required by the association. And at the end of the day, it really came down to three carriers who wanted to play on the biggest component, and that's the property. One of those three offered a business owner's package, but the pricing on it at the end of the day, along with the coverage levels, specifically with regard to the deductibles, I think made it, they kind of put them in a second tier versus what we've here presented for you here today at the end of the day. Even with the advantages that a business owner's policy has, it just at the end of the day didn't make sense, in my opinion, with how things are. How things came out with Travelers from a pricing and a coverage perspective. So as we're looking at this thing here, we're actually splitting this off. So there'll be a number of different sections here. We have the property section, the general liability section, the umbrella, the directors and officers coverage, or D&O coverage, as you'll hear me refer to it. And Travelers came out the best to cover your 8 buildings, 16 units, your clubhouse, and your docks. Giving you a total insurance value of $21,828,000 and some change. That is significantly better than the other carriers were wanting to offer. From a coverage perspective, it's significantly higher than what you currently have expiring with American Family. And in fact, the clubhouse was included, but the docks were not included on the schedule that I ever saw. And so we're actually picking up the coverage on the docks themselves. From a deductible perspective, also a massive improvement over your current policy and what else we found in the marketplace. We have a $10,000 all peril deductible for the policy level, and then a 3% wind and hail deductible for the perils of wind and hail as it pertains to all of your building structures. American Family, I believe, was at a 5% wind and hail deductible. Other carriers were at $25,000 policy level deductible. Some of them even had a per building deductible of $25,000 plus a 5% wind and hail deductible. So the Travelers really stepped forward on this and put a big foot forward. They have a long history of writing these type of accounts. We have a great relationship with Travelers. When I had the conversation with Travelers, my underwriter talked about the elite nature of this particular risk, and that we wouldn't ask them to carry lower deductibles if we didn't have a client or a risk that warranted that. So really happy with how they stepped forward on this. The other great thing is that they've waived co-insurance, which is fantastic. Co-insurance, there's what we call a co-insurance penalty clause, and it basically states that if for some reason there is a loss and the cost to rebuild the structures at the time is, let's just say the total amount, let's say, God forbid, there's a tornado and it just wipes everything out. Let's say that it really should be $30 million or $26 million in structural coverage, and we only carried 21.8. The co-insurance penalty clause says, hey, because you are underinsured by 20%, 30%, whatever, we're actually going to penalize you on the actual payout as well. So instead of getting $21.8 million in payout, we're going to reduce that by the percentage that you were underinsured. And Travelers waived that. Again, the only carrier that came to the table with that. Most of the carriers had a 20% penalty for being underinsured. Really, as we went through the coverage levels with the buildings, we feel as though that this is a solid number. We actually added the lower level square footage for the units, which is pretty rare. Most of the carriers were just saying, hey, we want ground level and above. As we went through, like the construction of the units, went through all the photos with Kristen. She agreed with me that we needed to probably beef up the coverage a little bit, and so we added the lower level square footage at a lower, reconstruction cost amount, obviously, because we don't have to redig the hole and some other things there. But that brought the reconstruction coverage level up to $21.8 million all in. So when you think about, and this is blanket coverage, so that's the other big takeaway with this is when we're talking about coverage, we're not looking at a per unit limitation. We have a giant bucket of money of $21.8 million to rebuild all the structures as they stand on the premises should something happen again, God forbid. So that's very good versus having a per building limitation of 2.1 million and then 2.4 million, et cetera, et cetera. And it really allows for things like that anomaly with Brett's unit, where his unit's bigger, has a little bit more square footage in there. We did take that into account during the reconstruction cost estimations, but really when it all feeds into this bucket of money here. And then it goes for the docks and the clubhouse as well. All of that is included in this amount. So very happy with this, where this came out as far as the cost per hundred for insurance goes. General liability, actually, I brought this down. This came out at $666. They had a broker fee in there, and was able to get them to waive that. So that brought that down $166 down to $500 even. This is your general liability underlying. We just call this underlying coverage, right? So if somebody slips and falls or whatever, this is the first line of defense from a lawsuit prevention perspective, and this is going to be the first thing to pay out. So you have up to $1 million per occurrence and up to $2 million aggregate in a given policy year of coverage before the umbrella gets tapped. Then we switch to, and the retention amount, side note, is $0, which is great. That means that there's no deductible for this. If that is not enough, there's a significant event, somebody severely injured, slip and fall is a great example. Somebody, God forbid, knocking on wood for you here, falling off a dock, somebody's grandkid, drowning or something of that nature off the docks. That's where the umbrella kicks in. If that were to blow past $1 million, up to $10 million in coverage. So these would stack. So you'd have $11 million for the occurrence and up to $12 million aggregate for the year. And that premium came in at $33.48 for the year. From a directors and officers coverage, quick side note with this: your association, you currently carry $10 million. Your association requires you to carry a minimum of $10 million. So an aggregate of 11 million and 12 million, or 11 million per occurrence, up to 12 million aggregate, is I think a reasonable increase with that. That is a lot higher. I mean, every carrier kind of raised their eyebrows when I brought up the $10 million for the umbrella. And most commercial lines carriers will cap out at 5 million. That's the most they would write. So at one point we were looking at having 3 liability policies, one for the general liability and then 2 $5 million umbrellas spread over 3 different carriers to try to spread that risk out. But distinguished partners or programs came up big for us and offered the 10 million. Directors and officers liability. The one actually attached is CNA, Secura. I should have removed that. I apologize. So Secura is not going to be a player on this one for us. We initially were starting off, the initial numbers we were getting back on this was between $5,000 and $6,000 a year. CNA came in, again, great for us on this, offering $3 million of directors and officers coverage for $2,930 a year, which is almost half of what other carriers were quoting it for. And their retained limit was $5,000. Again, most carriers were in that $25,000 to $35,000 range. CNA stepped up and gave us a $5,000 retention. That's your deductible upfront amount if there was ever a lawsuit. So your total all-in package on this thing, pretty happy with how this turned out, $51,981 and some change. It's important as we go through, I've attached a proposal for each carrier here in the same order. So as you go through this and look at things, you want to pay attention to how the billing is handled, because one of the downsides of working with a scenario like this is every carrier has a little bit different twist on how they want things paid. For example, the D&O policy with CNA, they don't have payment plans. It's literally, hey, you owe us $2,930. And my agency, when we bind coverage, actually has to front that cash. I pay the bill. We call that agency bill. So they bill my agency, and then I collect a check from the association. Then I turn around and I pay for the money on to CNA. It's just it's just one of the funky things about commercial insurance. So anyway, I digress. As we go through this thing, I'm not going to cover every single component to it. I did highlight some things to focus on. Again, looking at the blanket limit here, this is Travelers of 21,800, 21.8 million. You're going to see a couple different things here. You're going to see premises and buildings. Okay. And it might seem confusing to you, but what we did is we actually bucketed the buildings that were identical. So the buildings that had the same basic walkout construction with the same basic deck, et cetera, we combine that into a single premises, into a single building limit. And so you'll see the square footage. That'll be the indication of how many units are actually included into one. And so that's why I would say, you'll get confused if you look at it here because of how Travelers constructed this for us. And the beautiful thing about it is it allowed them to be more aggressive on the rate. So the big thing to look at is the $21.8 million blanket coverage. If you get into the weeds and you start looking at buildings, you're going to get confused. I can provide that information if you really want it. But just know that the strategic approach that we took is we said, okay, so like as we look all the way to the end of your units at 1229, at the end there where it doesn't have a walkout basement, right? So versus some have a partial, we have a daylight basement, and then some have a complete walkout, and then you have Brett's units, or his building has more square footage than everybody else. And then of course we have the dock and the clubhouse, which are we tucked under one of the buildings here. I'll just scroll down and see if I can find. I think we put it under, right here. So it technically is going to appear under 1229, but you'll see that unit, and then you'll see 850 square feet, right, which would be the clubhouse, and then you see 650 square feet, which would be the docks. And so just know that that's how this whole thing is built. Focus on the bucket. 3% wind and hail deductible, and of course then we have a $10,000 policy level deductible. So basically that means if the claim is caused by anything other than wind and hail, there's a $10,000 deductible total. It's a blanket deductible. If there is a wind and hail loss, then it is a 3% of your $21 million. That's if the entire association is hit. If only one building is hit, the 3% would only apply to the value of that building itself. Okay. So that's an important detail to note. A couple things that I have listed under here that are included. Again, I'm not going to go through all this. Some of it applies, some of it doesn't. This is like when you buy a car and it comes with heated steering wheel and, leather seats and some of that stuff. And you say, I don't care about that. I want to strip that out. Well, it's just not how it's constructed. It's a lot of these things do apply to other risks like yours. And so they just include it in some of their package pricing. So abrupt collapse is an important coverage, particularly when you guys have large decks. If you have a party, you're hosting a lot of people. If something, God forbid, were to happen where there was just an abrupt collapse, there was not a wind and hail or fire event, everything, you just collapse. And I also look at the docks the same way. That coverage is included here, and a lot of base policies will exclude that type of a scenario. Looking down here further, the fire department service charge. If the fire department has to come out and they have to fight a fire, even if it's a small one, and they hit the association with a fire department service charge, it's actually very common now. I typically am seeing them on a residential. We're seeing anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for the fire department service charge. And if it's a commercial thing, it can be upwards of 10 grand. Well, in this particular case, there's no deductible with this. That's what the asterisk indicates. And they'll pay up to 25 grand for a fire department service charge. Not that we want to invite people just, calling them out because of a cat stuck in a tree. But if there's an actual covered event or an event that causes the fire department to come out, then there's a $25,000 coverage line there. Pollutant cleanup and removal. Again, I think about this in regard to the boats that you have in the area. If you have an issue with a dock that's not installed properly, or because of high winds, things uproot and boats sink. And now we've got gas and oil in the water. It gets very, very expensive to do that. This is not going to pay for all of that, but there is 25 grand there. Somebody's carrying, if they're carrying gas, can of gas or something like that, and it tips over, and we've got issues there. There are some pollutant cleanup help that exists in the policy. Again, not going to be enough money to cover everything overall, but it helps. Again, not going to hit all of these things here. Just going to highlight a couple of these ordinance and law we talked about. And Wayne, you had mentioned that, didn't need a ton of that. So we've got it capped at 25 grand for the entire scenario. And then drivers actually include signs within, 1,000 feet of your property line. So, and that's included in your bulk building limit there. Scroll through here. Let me get to the next component here. So these are your billing options here with this particular plan with travelers. So you can review those and decide what makes the most sense. This is USLI. This is your general liability policy at $500. Here you have your direct bill payment options. You can do a single payment. You can do two payments with that. And there's some yes, no questions that are asked there. You're getting 1 million per occurrence and 2 million max for the event. There is some personal injury stuff, some medical expense stuff. This is the go away money to try to prevent somebody from suing you. So let's say somebody falls, and breaks a wrist or something like that. I'd be out there with a check for $5 grand to say, hey, sign here, don't sue. It's go away money. All right. As we get down here, there's another summary of your payment options. You can do single pay or two pay on the umbrella or on the general liability. And then a little bit of Q&A, kind of community association. Why do you need GL coverage, et cetera, et cetera. Some resources here for you with regard to the association itself. I'd left it in there in case you wanted to refer to it. Probably not. Distinguished partners. This is your umbrella policy for $10 million, your premium that's associated with it. And then you have direct bill option here. So, and this is paid in full. Okay, so if we bind this coverage, this is another payment amount that would be paid in full. Those are the different lower options that they would have quoted us if for some reason you guys voted to lower your liability requirement. They threw that in there. Finally, is your directors and officers coverage here through IHG, which is CNA. It's a subsidiary of CNA Insurance. And you've got $3 million of coverage as required by the bylaws. Again, that is something that we would, my commercial specialist, she's been doing this for 40 years. I've been doing this for 27 years. Neither of us have seen a D&O requirement for an association at $3 million. I mean, 99% of them are at $1 million. I think she mentioned she saw one, but it was a very large. It was like 60 units in a retirement community that had $2 million of D&O. But $3 million is very expensive, and it's actually difficult to get. You can't even get it through a standard lines market. We had to go through kind of these subsidiaries that these guys do a lot of coverage for banks and financial institutions, that have larger directors and officers exposures. So it's not a huge expenditure there, but it is not easy to get. When we tell them it's for a condo association, they kind of raise the eyebrows and go, really? Is that what the bylaws require? Yep. Send them a copy of the bylaws. And then we got them to play on it. All right. So that's it. Again, a little bit more information here at the bottom about directors and officers coverage. Let me know questions, changes, alterations that you would have to the program itself. And we can get that adjusted and tweaked for you accordingly. And basically, if the next step on this is if the board decides, hey, this is what we want to do and move forward with it, let me know if there's any tweaks we need to make. We would make those changes. And then I would send over and then also determine the payment methodology you want to use. Are you wanting to pay in full? Are you wanting to pay monthly where possible, pay quarterly, to pay, whatever it is? And then I can send over a summary, kind of an invoice schedule as far as what would be due up front and then what the ongoing monthlies would be. And then I would we got to go in and populate all the applications and send those over or just finalize the paperwork for signature approval by the representative of the association. And then we are good to go. So The last component will be is that Travelers specifically is going to outline. They're gonna make a phone call and set up a time to do a walkthrough of the property, to do an overview walkthrough. And so they'll take a look at everything and make recommendations of changes or anything that they would see as being a liability factor. So if you have anything else, let me know. Thanks so much for the opportunity to compete for this, and have a fantastic afternoon.